Hey there, I'm Steve, and welcome to JamsinEntertainment. And welcome to the conversation. Just before we get started, there are many ways you can help. You can like and subscribe so you never miss a conversation. But most importantly, please share this video. Get the word out there as a community we can talk about all things that we love. Today on Throwback Thursday, we're looking at Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. In addition to the original cast, you also have Catherine Hicks, Robert Ellenstein, John Schuck, and Brock Peters. Movie picks up more or less where the last one left off. It opens up with the Klingons pleading their case to the Federation president that Kirk and crew should be expedited to Klingon in order to face the charges being brought up against them about Project Genesis and the destruction of the Klingon crew under the command of Captain Crew. Kirk and crew are still in the possession of the Klingon bird of prey, and they landed on Vulcan, where they are getting modifications, repairs, and upgrades. So this is the second most outlandish Star Trek film. The first most outlandish one is the next one, The Final Frontier. But I think what doesn't make sense the most, Lieutenant Saavik, played again by Robin Curtis, stays behind on Vulcan. Now, she was only involved with the actions of the Enterprise after the fact. I mean, she was also rescued, so she is a special case. But she should also go back to Earth to at least offer testimony, which is precisely what Spock intends to do. But for some reason, she stays on Vulcan. About Spock. Since he's gotten his catcher back, he is kind of suffering amnesia. I say kinda because he's rediscovering who he is. Mostly has the mind of a child as far as he's very curious and very open. He certainly has the intellect that he once had. They really show this by him going over tests in front of a bunch of computers. And then the computer finally asks him, "How do you feel?" And he's confused by this. Enter his mother, Amanda, played by Jane Wyatt. She informs Spock that the computer knows he is half human, and that's why it asks the question, "How do you feel?" Spock says it is irrelevant. So, along with Spock rediscovering who he is, he's probably the most Vulcan you've ever seen him. Yes, he portrayed what a Vulcan is quite well. Actually, I mean, of course he displayed what a Vulcan is quite well in the classic series because he had to invent. Yeah, I'm sure he was told what a Vulcan is, and he read on the script how he's supposed to act, and was directed as much. But really, he sculpted what a Vulcan is. He is the ultimate blueprint. And so it's fascinating, pun always intended, seeing him rediscover himself. The back and forth him and his mother have about being Vulcan and human and feelings that he will experience. And he says, "Very well, but I cannot wait for them here. I must go to Earth." She asks, "Why?" "To offer testimony." "You do this for friendship." "I do this because I was there." This really sets a tone for how this character goes through this movie. It's first like a fish out of water because he's rediscovering himself, and then he's double fish out of water because the entire crew travels back in time to save humpback whales. Why? There is this probe journeying through space to Earth to communicate with humpback whales. Now, everyone on Earth doesn't realize this because the sound they're getting is alien. Of course, they don't realize that until Kirk and Uhura put together that the message is being directed at Earth's oceans. So Kirk asks Uhura, "What would this sound like underwater?" And it comes back as whale song. And Spock deduces that this message can't possibly be responded to because there are no humpback whales after he figures out which one specifically is making the sound. And so that's where they come up with time warp. This is where it's outlandish. The idea is gain enough speed and you slingshot yourself around the sun and you achieve time warp. I'm sure physicists today will be like, "Nope, it doesn't work that way. You'll just incinerate yourself." And they almost do fly apart. But they achieve it. They go back to the latter half of the 20th century, namely the 80s, because that's when this movie was made. So at the time, it was present day. And once they're in San Francisco, because that's where they discover humpback whales, these are the closest pair they can find. They go out and just the experiences that the crew have in modern day, it's hilarious. This movie has so much charm because it's so funny. It's so fun. And I love all the little, like, winks they give to the audience. For instance, Uhura and Chekhov are tasked with getting nuclear energy to repair the dilithium crystals. Now, dilithium crystals are the energy source that makes warp possible in Star Trek universe. And the trip to the past has diluted them, and Scotty points out there's no way to possibly recharge them, except for maybe using 20th century nuclear technology. And so, in trying to find the nuclear vessels, they're asking people on the streets. One of them is a police officer, a real police officer. It's not an extra. This wasn't staged. It's just Nichelle Nichols and Walter Koenig on the streets of San Francisco asking where the nuclear vessels are in Alameda. It's a naval base. This cop says nothing. All he does is stare at them suspiciously. What makes it so funny is that Chekhov is Russian. This is at the tail end of the Cold War. So you can see why the cop is so suspicious. They ultimately find the naval base, and the ship that they are going to retrieve the energy from is the Enterprise. Scotty, McCoy, and Sulu also have their own fun adventure. Sulu is tasked with finding transportation for whatever apparatus they end up using to contain the whales. Scotty and McCoy go to find said containment, while Spock and Kirk pursue the whales. And in doing so, they run into Jillian, who is a marine biologist but an expert in whales, specifically humpback whales, which is very convenient for Kirk and Spock. I don't want to go into details because it's just a joy to watch it for yourself. And just the crew interacting with the 80s. For instance, swearing. Not something you normally heard back in Star Trek then, and really through the 90s and early 2000s. There is some swearing, but it's just the way that people swear in this movie and the way that the crew tries to adapt to that is hilarious, especially Spock, because he's taking everything literally. You will never beat the comic duo in sci-fi that is Spock and McCoy. Despite this being part of a larger story, you really could watch this as is. You don't need a whole lot of context. And one last tidbit of information before we go. I'm sure even if you're not a Star Trek fan, you've heard the phrase, "Beam me up, Scotty." That phrase is never actually uttered in all of Star Trek. The closest the franchise gets to that line is, "Scotty, beam me up," much like other lines from other movies that I won't get into because spoilers, and I don't want to do that. Those are my thoughts on Star Trek The Voyage Home. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and live your imagination.